there are approximately 3,600 PTAs, and every year we have about 900 to 1,000 PTAs renew their bylaws, they update them. Also for a term, which is 2 years, I will be going through at least 2,000 bylaws. So oddly enough, for something like bylaws, which absolutely fascinates me because everybody said, well, nobody ever knows anything about bylaws. Those who are in PTAs in a lot of different places are intensely interested in their bylaws. It's weird, perhaps, but it's real. It depends on what kind of PTA you have and what kind of bandwidth you have in terms of bylaws and parliamentary and all that stuff. So I have handouts for you today that I'll give you as we walk through this stuff. And essentially what we're going to do is we're going to do a little bit of everything. We're going to look at the idea of what the heck a parliamentarian does, right? What kind of things, if you were a parliamentarian, would be expected of you. We'll look a little bit at the idea of not just the roles, but also a few how-tos, so that you have a better understanding of what might be possible. And then also look at the notion of bylaws, and I want to talk a little bit about what's in the bylaws, and I want you to look a little bit at the e-bylaws program, and I'll also touch on the fact that we have new, what we like to call remodeled bylaws, which are getting rolled out in different ways and perhaps slower than anyone ever dreamed. But the tech company is getting there. They're just not there yet. And I'll say more about that in a second. So can I just take a second and have you introduce yourself and maybe tell us where you're from and how long you've been involved in PTA? How's that? We'll start with you, sir. Go ahead.
Great. I'm Brett Henriksen. I'm from Bay Farm School in Alameda. I am a new parliamentarian and new to the PTA.
Thank you, Brett.
Shakisha Savada, president at Steele Elementary. New to president.
New president too?
Yeah.
And it was Keisha?
Shakisha.
Shakisha. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Umara Siddiqui, and I'm from Kichama Elementary from Union City. I'm the new president too. I just started here, so we will probably learn a lot.
Thank you. Go ahead.
My name is Sheila Timbang. I'm also from Kichama Elementary in Union City. I'm new parliamentarian. My first year on the board, but I've been involved and been in the PTA involved as chairperson for this, that, and the other thing for about 7 years.
Oh, that's wonderful. Thank you. Yes, sir. Look at that. Go ahead.
Hi everyone, I'm Chris Longstead. I'm the safety chair at Warwick Elementary in Fremont, and I'm full of President Heidi Barnes that I would like to do 1 year as safety, and the following year, this position is open as parliamentarian the first 2 years.
Great. Thank you.
Nicole Nomura, Gatos Elementary in Fremont. I was parliamentarian this year. I've been on the board for 6 years.
Thank you. Nicole?
Nicole.
Go.
My name is Sharice Morris. I am the parliamentarian for Treeview Elementary here in Hayward, and this is my first year as parliamentarian. Last year I was just a supporting role.
Thank you.
Amanda Maher, Shebrook Park, and I'm new to PTA and new parliamentarian.
Thank you.
Susan Austin from Hillcrest Elementary, and I was historian last year and parliamentarian this year.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Veritas from Pleasanton PTA Council, and I'm the president of that.
I'm Veronica Medina from Music Elementary in Newark, and I am parliamentarian. This is my 3rd year in PTA.
Excellent. Thank you. So you can see we're a mixture, right? There's people who are parliamentarians, there's people who are presidents, and there's people who are new, all that sort of thing. You know, if your mother-in-law says to you, you're a parliamentarian, what the heck does that mean as your PTA volunteer job? Essentially, it breaks down into 3 pieces, right? You're going to help the president. You're going to be that advisor. You're really the president's wingman on the board. That's often why people say parliamentarian's going to be appointed, right? Not elected, which means, for instance, you can't sign checks. You can't be a check signer if you're a parliamentarian because you're not an elected officer. So you're gonna be that consultant to the president. You're gonna break it down. What else do you get to do? Well, certainly too, you're gonna be that helper, that mentor for other people who are on board members, as well as members in general, to try to help people understand, why do we have to be so formal? There's 10 parents in the room. Why the heck do we have motions? Why can't we just say, are we gonna do it or not? Who hates this? Anybody hate this? No, everybody's good? Okay, move on. We'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. And then the last piece, this idea of the person who, come on in and join us. The last piece being simply the person who's the point person for the bylaws, right? You're gonna be the facilitator for the bylaws. So that's the kind of thing you're going to get to do if you're a parliamentarian. And we're gonna look at each little piece and just look at some examples and look at some ideas to share, okay? Anybody got any idea about updating bylaws, how often we ask that be done, and according, it's actually in your bylaws? Have you noticed that at all?
Every 3 years.
Every 3 years, right? So it says that in the state PTA bylaws, it says that in the unit bylaws as well as council and district. We have actually just changed that at state PTA. It has to be approved by the next convention in Monterey in May 2019. But we're changing it from 3 years to 5 years. We've already voted on it at this, what's called the state PTA Board of Managers and Board of Directors. So that's gonna be coming on stream. And why the heck would we bother to do that? Well, the notion is this is gonna give you a lot more flexibility at the unit level. It will also free up council and district parliamentarians, because the units will be able to spread their bylaws updates over a greater amount of time. So as I say, that's gonna be slightly changed as of post-May 2019, because convention's gonna be voting on that. So that first piece, the idea of being a consultant to the president, being the president's wingman and trying to help them a little bit. You can do things like keep a speakers list, right? So that's really helpful. Has anybody ever been having to run a meeting? Would it be helpful to have somebody, if there's more than sort of 10 people in the room, be the person beside you who says, okay, it's Tony's turn next, in the sense that they can write it on a bit of paper next to you. If you run meetings, once they get a little bit more than sort of a dozen people, it's hard to be right on, which you have to do to run meetings, right? You're on all the time, you have to pay attention, in other words, for the time of the meeting. And that means that you can't always be conducting the meeting and seeing who's indicating of, hey, I want to say something, it's my turn kind of thing. So if a parliamentarian can do that for you, that's something they can do by sitting beside you, taking a bit of paper and just writing as people put their hands up, or say hey you, or whatever it is that you use to get each other's attention. The idea of a timekeeper, that's really valuable. Has anybody ever been in meetings that seem to go on for like ever? There can be the plan is that we're out of here within 30 minutes or 40 minutes. And yet here you are, and it's like 2 hours later, they're still talking about the carnival, and you think, why can't these people stop this? Make them stop before I just go crazy, have to leave, one or the other. It's really good to know and to respect each other's time, right? One of the big things that drives people away from our meetings is there's too much time. You told me I was going to be out of there and home by 8 o'clock. I have a babysitter in, everybody is lined up to support me on this, and yet your meeting last time went till 8:45. This is crazy. I'm not coming back. That's what people say to themselves, right? So we have to be really respectful of people's time, I think, for meetings. And if you want people to come to meetings, you need to make them short. You need to make them relevant. You have to make me want to come to your meeting as a member. I have many options, right? I can be a volunteer for the swim team if my kid's involved in that. I can be a scout leader. I can be a church leader. I can be lots of stuff as a volunteer. So if I'm gonna be a PTA volunteer, you better have something in it for me. That's what people need. So one of those things is a guarantee that I value your time. And meetings can be very important in making sure that happens. So having somebody act as a timekeeper, parliamentarian for instance, that can be really useful. And as well, if somebody's running a meeting, the parliamentarian, it's like good cop, bad cop, right? Parliamentarian can be that person doing this. We have to move on. Has anybody ever used a timed agenda?
Mm-hmm.
Did you find it useful?
Very.
And what was sort of the benefit for those who
It
might
just
not have
keeps
seen one?
people in their lane, in their time span, so they can't keep running on and on. And I'm a project manager at work, so I kind of brought those tools to the PTA, because when I started, there was no time, so people just talk, and like you said, you'd be there for like an hour talking about the carnival.
Yeah, or the color of the napkin. I don't
Yes.
care what paper napkins you buy at Walmart, you know? Go for it, go nuts. But just don't tell me, don't talk about it. Because all that stuff is like committee stuff, right? That's stuff that should be done outside of any big public meeting, a board meeting or an association, that general meeting. And as you say, in terms of managing, when people know that they have to be short and sweet, it helps a lot. 3 minutes, 5 minutes, don't give anybody any more time for anything. And that includes the principal doing a report. You know, the principal, if you say to them 5 minutes, they'll take 10. That's a given. But you know what? Telling them 5 means that they know I'm supposed to keep this brief. Any big reports, nobody needs more than 5 minutes for sure, whether it's a treasurer's report, an auditor's report, unless there are multiple questions. And that you have to obviously honor, and people want their questions answered. But if you have that timed agenda, if the president sets that up, they can see, you know, welcome and introductions, 2 minutes, flag, 1.5 minutes, you know, these things don't take long, all the way down. So you can think in terms of actually having that meeting that is 30 minutes, that you promised, you know, was gonna happen. Basic parliamentary questions, you know how to Google, I know how to Google. It's very easy nowadays, especially to sit there with your phone if somebody asks something specific that you know, you just don't know, is that a motion that you can do? Google it. Robert's Rules of Order, very easy to find some bit of information, and people will, you know, they'll wait for you to be able to do that. This little version of Robert Rules of Order, if you get the paperback rather than use one online, it's about that thick. It's a lot of pages. But the little brief one, Robert's Rules of Order in brief, this is very useful. Simply because it's real straightforward and easy to read. So if you're a parliamentarian, you may want to look at this kind of thing. Sorry, you had a question.
Oh, so no, when it comes to the committee meetings you were speaking of, those don't have to have agendas and so on and so forth. That's just that's for them to do, right?
But they can. It depends on your style. Generally speaking, committee meetings can have an agenda. And it can be as simple as, you know, welcome, you know, the show we're starting at
We're not
3
keeping
o'clock.
track of that, or any-
Well, that's up, you know, that's up to you. But there are PTAs which any committee meeting they also have minutes, especially if there's any motions that involve money, because that's your paper trail, right? So generally speaking, that's what happens. But you know, think about it. And the reason it's valuable is when you have an agenda, that means that somebody else's agenda is not going to be the one that takes over the meeting. So you see, it helps to keep people focused, as you were talking about, and that can be useful. You know, it's like here's the 3 things we're going to talk about at this meeting. So, what great idea you have, we'll save that for another meeting. Has anybody used an issue bin for that kind of thing? Sometimes called parking lot. Do you have an idea what that is? Anybody want to? Go ahead.
Oh, I use it a lot. So when they just go off track or want wanna bring up something that we don't have time for, or it can turn into like a bigger discussion, you just kindly tell them that's a parking lot item, and then bring it up probably in the next agenda if there's time, or if it's not dissolved before then, to keep it on track.
Yeah, and you can literally just take a piece of poster paper, like poster board, right? You stick it up on the wall when if you're in a meeting, and somebody, you're talking, let's stay with it, you're talking carnival, and somebody just wants to talk science fair. And you know you'd like a science fair in the spring, but at the moment it's like 7 months away, so let's not talk about it now. So when they bring up that subject, you go to your bit of paper on the wall, and which you can call an issue bin or parking lot. Okay, that's great. We do need to talk about the science fair. Let's put that on the agenda for next time. We'll put it on our issue bin or our parking lot, and that means it'll come up for discussion next meeting when it's more appropriate. But today we're not talking about the science fair, because that's obviously what's going to make you run away with time, right? By just, again, going with other people's agendas rather than the person running the meeting, their agenda. So you could do that kind of thing, helping answer questions, identifying ways to keep the meeting running on, and we'll talk about that in a second. In terms of, how do you tell people about why parliamentary procedure matters? There are 5 basic rules of parliamentary procedure. These are the parliamentary basics. And essentially they are the purpose and the driving piece behind why we do it this way, why we have these formal sort of arrangements with PTA meetings. Your PTA is a nonprofit 501c3, right? It's a public benefit nonprofit corporation, in fact. So as a consequence, you're actually a board member of a legal entity. I know we don't like to talk about this, it's just way too scary. That's who you are. You're a major figure as a PTA leader. You're a major figure on your campus, on your school site. And therefore, as a public figure, you have to know that. And you can maybe act one way at home, but you know what? On campus as PTA president, board member, that's who that's your face. That's your public face. And you have to be really, really aware of that, because everybody looks to you as the face of PTA. In any case, when you're talking about, rules of meetings, these 5 basics, the idea of order, one business item at a time, right? We're all going to talk about the multicultural night, and next we're going to all talk about the teacher's appreciation lunch, that kind of thing, one thing at a time. The idea that everybody gets equal opportunity, that's what the basics of parliamentary procedure is democracy. And democracy is a messy, messy thing, but it's very good in the sense of everybody should be able to have a chance to be able to have their say with parliamentary procedure. The notion of justice and fairness, the idea that everybody understands what the heck's going on. And you're going to see that, for instance, in the actual formal way in which you do a motion that we'll look at in a second. There's 8 pieces involved with making a motion, and one of those happens to be the fact that the person who's running the meeting, the president, they repeat this darn motion at least 3 or 4 times. They just keep telling the same thing. Somebody puts forward a motion, I as the president repeat the motion. Then I say, would you like to speak to your motion? And then you speak to your motion as the person who does it. Towards the end, after there's debate, I'm going to say again as the president, we're now going to vote on blah, blah, here's the motion. And then after people vote, I'm supposed to, as president, repeat the fact, this is what you just voted on, this is what this motion just did. And why you have this constant repeating of the information is because that person in the back who's on their cell phone, trying to negotiate something with their 14-year-old, right? Whatever for dinner is needed or whatever. They're not necessarily going to have heard the first time it was said or the second time. So by the 3rd time it gets said, the same damn motion, it's essentially so everybody knows This is what we're talking about here, guys. This is what you're about to vote on. This is what you have voted on. This is what you just did in your vote. So there's that repetition. And then the last two pieces, which I think are really, really important. Every motion has the notion that people get to be heard. Minority, that is those on the losing side of whatever the vote might be, who don't get the result they want. They have had a chance to be heard, but what's really important too is the right of the majority to decide. So if I'm a board member, one of the most important things for me is to really appreciate and understand I am dying to have a science fair. My kids love science. They all want to be engineers and doctors. So they're just dying to have more robotics, more science fairs, etc. But if the majority in our meeting says, it's such a big thing to organize, let's not go there this year because we're doing so much more, and it doesn't happen, it gets voted down, this idea of having a science fair, you know what? I, as a board member, when I walk out of that board meeting, I never talk science fair again. I don't walk around saying, how foolish are these people who don't understand how great a science fair is. I can't believe they didn't vote for this. This is like the best thing we could possibly. Don't go there. Don't keep gnawing at that bone. And it's important because the majority have made a decision. It's not you. It isn't all about you, even though we love it when it is all about us, right? But the reality is it isn't. So as a board member, you're on board with whatever the decision was made with the board, and that's your face to the membership. You're 100% behind whatever that decision might be. And that's really important to understand. That's part of your role as a board member, is to suck it up. It really is. And it's important because it's the responsible thing and the right thing to do. So if you had to sort of try to help people understand why do we do this, why do we have parliamentary procedure, how could you sort of spread the word? Has anybody got any ideas? Maybe we'll just share them because it's a small group. What would be one way that you could help people understand why the heck this matters? Well, how do you communicate with your members? You don't?
We're brand new. We're chaotic.
There you go.
It's really chaotic, so I don't know.
Sure.
With
Yes,
us-
ma'am, go
We have a
ahead.
group message. If we come up with this certain thing, we just text each other, and then we start the communication in that group. We started doing this year, something new, because we are all not making a time to sit down, or at least make a time to talk about the things, and
Yeah.
a lot of things going on in the year. We are taking time for our executive board only on Mondays for 1 hour, wherever we can get together. So it's easier for us to make everything ready for the meetings or events, big events coming on, like we just had it at Trump or Tree on this Friday. So these are the big events and needs a lot of volunteer and a lot of work, but just one meeting cannot make it go through it.
Right.
So we need to do something else besides that, and we all work, so we don't have time to make it. So we try to make one day out of month, or two days out of month, like Mondays, pick any Mondays, or alternate Mondays, and then we are sitting together, just the executive board for 1 hour, and trying to just make it through everything together.
Yep.
So it's
Yep.
easier way to communicate with our board members.
Yeah, and it's important to understand to do what works, what is best for your group. So you have an idea, sir?
Well, I was just gonna say with us, it's kind of like some people are new, some people have been there for a long time, so it's kind of, everyone has a different communication method. Our president just told me she doesn't do technology too well, and but the rest of us are, that's what we prefer, because we do our vote on the go. And so that kind of is creating a little bit of a challenge with communication.
Yeah.
So I think everybody all on the same page at the same time, even to even attend the meeting is a challenge. And
Right.
so that's what we're experiencing.
Mm-hmm. Yes, ma'am.
So when you say say members, you're talking about more than just the board, right? You're talking
Yeah,
about full
you,
membership,
you can,
right?
you can think in terms of the board, yeah, the parliamentarian's gotta help other people understand why it matters who are on the board, but
Right.
also the membership, yeah.
Right, so I think that there's a couple things that are really important when you talk about this. First of all, right now, we're in a day and age where, inclusion is very, very important, right? And so trying to find a format where a lot of people can get your message. We use a Facebook page for our school, for our PTA, to try to get messages out. We use Peach Jar. Our school has Peach Jar, so we put out flyers through that to try to get people to know what we have going on. I think the thing that, and I'll be very honest, I think we can all relate here, right? I think one of the things that I think we struggle with, and I think this is something that as I'm sitting here, we've been thinking about how we can do a better job within our own PTA, is we're not always good at including new members who come in, right?
Yes.
Let's be honest, we can be very cliquey. We all know it happens within our PTAs, right? Everybody's like, we all know this, right? I think we all have to do a much better job of, when we see a new person walk in the door, making sure that we introduce ourselves, we get to know who they are, who they're, ask them simple questions, what grade is your child in, right? The problem is I think, at least with our PTAs, we have people who come in and then never come back, right? And it's probably because they didn't really feel welcome, right?
Yep.
They felt like, oh, there's this group of people that they all know each other, and I'm just sitting at a table over here, no one's really talking to me. You can spread the word to members by creating that atmosphere of inclusion within your PTA. When people come to your meetings, then that word spreads beyond. It says, hey, I went to the PTA meeting on Wednesday night. It was a really cool group of people, and I really wanted to get more involved. Hey, you should come next time. I can tell you that's not happening at our PTA. It needs to happen.
Yeah, and you have to be very deliberate.
Yes.
And you have to also say it to everybody. I mean, we all think, well, everybody knows that. Nobody actually has to say that to a bunch of adults. You have to say that to your board members. We need to make overt and very proactive efforts to make people feel comfortable. So something as simple as any meeting, don't let board members sit together. That's actually something we do at state PTA all the time and always have. It's when you have large meetings, there's more than a dozen people who are actually board members, there's 14 of us. Don't sit together. Go and sit with people you don't know, because you're gonna look bad.
The only thing that we do have down, because we have nothing else down, is the fact that we use the Remind app. And we have everyone texting it on the Remind app. And we have people texting and then no one responds. All these people on this Remind app and no one, that's our problem. So Remind app is a good way to get stuff out. And then even the people that are not members, you're included, you know what we're doing, or you at least know when our meetings are.
Even something as simple as app meetings, one of the very best PTA presidents I've ever seen in action, this woman would be running a big meeting, because these were quite robust PTAs that had lots of members, so you'd have very large meetings, association meetings, you had big boards, etc. In any case, what she used to do as president is she came in with like a pad of stickies, and on them, all of them, they said, hi, my name's so-and-so, I'm the PTA president, here's my number, give me a call if you're interested in getting more involved. And when she saw somebody she didn't know, or she wasn't really familiar with, she would pass these little notes back in a meeting. And so people who are brand new, as you say, they walk in and you feel kind of awkward because all these parents are all talking to each other, nobody's talking to you. And it's not because people are trying to be mean, it's just they tend to want to catch up with people they haven't seen in a while, people they know. But being very aware, sort of topmost, that this is something we need to do, she modeled it really well. And it is often said, have those greeters. In PTA, stuff doesn't get done unless you actually say to somebody, you're the point person for this, right? What is the harm in having two board members, when people come into your meeting, in the hallway, whatever, they're the greeters. They're the Walmart type greeters for PTA. They're the ones who are gonna be the smiling people. They're the ones who are gonna say, hi, good to see you. And even though this sounds like, duh, why would we need to do that? It works. It all works. It's all simple. It costs you nothing. But it means you do have to be proactive. and it's very important to try to get that done kind of thing. This is what I was talking about in terms of like a motion, right? The idea of we have these formal motions as PTA leaders. And essentially, you know, people talk about the idea of we have 8 steps to a motion. The reason we have them, as I suggested earlier, is essentially to say again and again, this is what we're talking about, this is what we're talking about, focus on this is the motion, this is the subject, all that kind of stuff. And we vote on it because we have to have this formal process that somebody puts down in minutes, right, and actually records it in order to be legally operating as a nonprofit, 501c3. That's why we do all this kind of stuff. So to give you just a sense, there's a little script here. I need 5 volunteers. Does anybody want to be Reese Witherspoon? I look like her. Nicole Kidman. All you get is to read like a line or two. It's not, you have the biggest part. Who else we got? We got Chris Pratt. Is there a Chris Pratt in the room? We got 1 line. I think even 1 word perhaps. It's not a biggie, I must say. Who else do I need? I need 2 more, right? So I'm going to need Lin-Manuel Miranda. Would you like to be Lin-Manuel? Sure, I can tell. She's good for us. And last but not least, John Legend. Yes. Is there a John Legend in the crowd? There you go. So this is just to show you to have the sense of, you know, what's essentially a cadence, a call and response in terms of the reaction involved in making a motion and proceeding through it. So if we can just have the people who have the little parts, you can just sort of read your bit and you can start off whenever you're ready. As Reese Witherspoon, the president.
Is there any new business? Nicole?
I move that Washington PTA organize a book exchange for students.
Second.
It is moved and seconded that Washington PTA organize a book exchange for students. Is there any discussion? Nicole, do you want to speak to your motion?
Lots of families have gently used books that their kids have outgrown. It would be great for PTA to organize a book exchange. Students can bring a book they might not look at anymore and pick up one that's new to them.
Yes. Lin-Manuel?
It's a good idea, but with PTA sponsoring the school's Hamilton production, I don't know if there's time to do a book exchange too.
John?
I like the idea of a book exchange. It's a good way to focus on literacy and help boost kids' reading skills.
Does anyone want to speak against the motion? Any further debate? The motion before you is for Washington PTA to organize a book exchange for students. All those in favor of the motion say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed say no. The ayes have it. The motion is adopted and we will organize a book exchange for students.
Thank you, excellent. So you can see just the way people back and forth, you know, it's like playing tennis or something, and you gotta have a partner who's gonna respond and you can whack it back to them. But it's so that it's very clear, this is what we're talking about. The person who made the motion, they get to speak to it first. And I think perhaps the thing that pops out to many people is the simple fact that, OMG, we make the motion before we discuss the stuff. Yeah, actually, that's how you introduce a subject. Rather than having the big discussion and then doing the motion, generally speaking, you should be doing it the other way around.
So who can make the motion? Like the president cannot,
No.
and the
Anybody
parliamentarian?
else?
Oh, the parliamentarian.
Anybody else? Yep.
And can, like, if it's the treasurer wants approval of the report, can the treasurer make the motion to approve their own report?
And that's probably the most efficient, right?
Right.
If you have a treasurer's report and the treasurer says, I move let's see, ratify the bill, something like that, whatever it might be. And that way they're not waiting for somebody else. So that makes sense. Just the notion the president can't, it's just the idea that they actually can, but it's best not to. As president, you're supposed to be chairing, you're supposed to be neutral. And generally speaking, what happens if I'm running a meeting and if I'm the chair and I'm dying to have a say in a motion or something like that, I let somebody else take over. I say, can you just chair the meeting? And I literally walk away from wherever the center of gravity is for that meeting, and go into the audience and then have my say or have my motion or whatever, my opinion. But generally, the person running the meeting, the chair or the president in most cases, they don't want to make motions. And what you do is you set it up by having printed motions, right? Or you've said to your friend, I need a motion for X, Y, and Z. So when we get there, can you do this? Make sure somebody does this. Usually the board knows that has to be done, right? Because they've gone through much of this stuff at a board meeting before it comes to an association meeting. So that's just to give you a sense of that. A couple of things in promoting parliamentary procedure. As I mentioned, to make meetings go a little bit faster, you can think in terms of pre-written motions. Every meeting you're going to have the ratification of bills for the treasurer. You're going to have approval of the minutes. You're going to have things like that, approval of the agenda, right? So when there's something that needs a motion, you can actually just have them written. I think, and this is the way I do committee and board of directors meetings for state PTA, and the way I've always done it. When I have an agenda and there's a bunch of stuff that might need to approve, I just put blank, move that blank, and fill in whatever the motion is. And then whoever the secretary just has to write in the word of, the name of who actually approved the thing. When there's stuff, that there's specific things, and that way you're not wasting time. You're not having somebody spend a few minutes saying, what is it that we want to do? How would I word that? What should I include? Should I say that? No, it's right there. Just read it. It's real easy.
Did you say you put the blanks on the agenda?
I do.
So everyone sees them?
So everybody sees, yeah. For regular motions, yeah. And the thing is, if people don't like it, they can amend it. And in amending it, they can make it the opposite.
Right.
Right? But it's usually just for something that's, especially things to have things approved that, for state PTA toolkit, right? There might be a toolkit chapter that somebody's just edited. Do you approve it or not? That kind of straightforward thing. You can think in terms of having written motions at meetings. Has anybody ever been a PTA secretary? I have been a PTA secretary. And it is a nightmare in a large meeting that people make motions and you're having to write down word for word what they just said. And then you're also stuck with the fact that, isn't that Jose's dad? But you have no idea what that guy's name is. He's just Jose's dad, or, Brittany's mom. So ask people to actually write them down in your meetings. And you can have, the basic motion forms, which just have like a date, who's making the motion, what it says, a couple of lines, what the motion is, and then the ruling, if it was in favor or against. So you can encourage people to write the motion, and that's going to save you time too, in terms of making a meeting a little bit faster. You can also put stuff in your standing rules that can make your meetings move along. If something like lengthy meetings are a problem, think about having standing rules that say everybody who speaks on a motion, everybody gets 2 minutes max. We can only have 4 in favor, 4 against. Then we cut it off and we vote. And you can put these in your standing rules as guidelines for you to work with. If something really controversial comes up at any time because it's a standing rule, you don't have to go along with it. You have 2/3 of the people in the room at the meeting vote. to not adhere to standing rule 14 or whatever it might be, you don't have to use it for that meeting. I mean, that's the flexibility of a standing rule, right? So you can think in terms of that kind of thing, number of times per speaker. You can say, you know what, you get to speak on a subject once on a motion, and then let other people speak, rather than have the same person want to talk about 5 different times and say the same thing over and over again in different words, and drive everyone mad, you know, that kind of thing. So you can be smart about it in that way. Last kind of piece for a nominating committee, that's something that the parliamentarian's going to do, right? They're going to be the one who gets the nominating committee, push it off, get it started up. You're going to be asked, if you're a parliamentarian, you're getting the materials together for the nominating committee to help them start. So you're going to, at the very first meeting, conduct the chairman's election for a nominating committee. But you're not part of the nominating committee as a parliamentarian, unless they say to you, we want to vote as the nominating committee to have you as part of our committee. Or if the general body of your association, if they vote the parliamentarian on to be a member of the nominating committee. So there's a little timeline that's involved. 2 months out, you're getting a nominating committee. The parliamentarian is going to be the person who's going to get the materials together to get them started. You can see for a nominating committee, they've essentially got 4 weeks. And then they've got to flip back and get the report in before the association meeting, the election meeting actually happens. And you get more info about this in the bylaws in Article 5, right? If I'm parliamentarian, and for instance, I'm parliamentarian for state PTA, we have a election that's coming up. We've already nominated our nominating committee. I happen to be on the state nominating committee this time because I was elected as well. This is exactly what I have to do in about 2 weeks' time, is I have to meet with the other members of the nominating committee. I have to give them information, which I actually, in most cases, I've actually already emailed them info. These are the positions. We need to find these number of open positions. There's 14 of them. We also need to find people who are eligible for the office, and so there are different conditions for serving. Somebody who served as president and is termed out, you know what, they can't do it again. And you've got to be that bad guy to help people understand. I know they're a wonderful president. I know they're a wonderful treasurer, reflections chair. But you know what? It's not fair. You can't let them do it for 6 years, okay? Because it makes everybody else not get involved in your PTA for that very reason, even though that person does a great job. You want to, as a parliamentarian, they have to be, again, that person who says, you know what, we're not choosing our friends. This is not our BFF club. Instead, we have to make sure that we've got people who really do care about the kids at this school. That it isn't just about their own child or children. That they get that big picture. That it's about all the kids here that matter. So choose the best candidates. Parliamentarian talks about that. They should also be that person who talks about the simple fact that they need to make sure that this nominating committee, the people that are chosen for the board next term, they got to look like our campus. So if our campus has about 30% Hispanic families with kids who go to this school, you know what? We better have about at least 30% of Hispanic parents on our PTA. That's really, really important that you have that inclusion. And you also want to be able to say to them as parliamentarian, you know what, as the nominating committee, you're going to have discussions that you're not going to be comfortable with as individuals. You're actually going to have to talk about people that you might really, really like and say, you know what, I love Tom, he's our neighbor, he was my kid's scout leader, he was great as the scout leader, but you know what, he was also the treasurer for the swim team, and he was awful. He can't possibly be treasurer. So his name might be on there. He might have said, oh, I'll be treasurer. You can put my name on the slate. You know what? Tom's a great guy, but he's terrible treasurer. So you have to be that person on the nominating committee that can say that to each other. And know that, you know what, Tom 3 weeks later is not going to come up to me and say, why didn't you want me to be treasurer? I thought you were my friend. You know, Tom shouldn't have to hear that from anyone. It's not fair to me, and it's not fair to Tom, right? So you have to be able to be honest with each other, in other words, and have that confidential discussion. That's what a nominating committee has to do. They really have to be serious. I've been on lots of nominating committees, and they are serious. People are really good at understanding, you know what, this is bigger than us. So we have to get over ourselves, and we have to understand we need people to make this a good fit, and we need people to reflect our whole community. This matters a lot. So do you have any sort of questions about that kind of stuff? Last kind of piece, just bylaws in general, right? So PTA bylaws, has anybody looked at PTA bylaws lately? So if you were looking at bylaws, what do you find in them? What would be one thing? Do you have a memory of something you saw in the bylaws?
How officers are elected.
How officers are elected, yep. Anything else in PTA bylaws that you can think of?
Duties of the officers.
Who does what? Yep. That's in the certainly 217 bylaws. Anything else you have a sense of that's in bylaws?
Is it how to remove officers?
Yep. Yep. How you become an officer, right? With election, that's there, and how will you get removed? And it's officer removal. That's right. It's.
What is that? Can you tell me? I just was guessing.
No, it's there because it's a legal piece, right? Again, the scary part is we're all board members for a nonprofit 501c3. So, what California's state law means, you actually have to have in bylaws how people are elected, how these officers are elected, and how they are removed. And to remove somebody, essentially what you have to do is you have to contact your council if you're in council, or your district if you're not as a unit, and you say, you know what, so-and-so, Charlie has not been at a meeting in 3 months, 7 months, whatever it might be. If you miss 3 meetings, if you do something which is injurious to the organization, if you do something, thirdly, in terms of it goes against PTA policy, procedures, or bylaws, those are the 3 reasons that you can remove an officer. So if somebody's not doing their job, the executive board, after consulting with the council or district, they get to vote on it. You have 2/3, 66%, they vote. You know what, Charlie's got to go. He clearly is too much on his plate at the moment, not doing his job. And then you ask for that person to resign. And the fun part comes when they say, why? Why would I resign?
What about members?
The members don't vote, the board does.
No, can we, like, members, we have members.
Right.
And like, they're not.
They don't vote on this.
No. To remove members.
To remove members is essentially the same process if you ask somebody to resign or to step down. The thing is, you can't make them. You know, you're not the boss of me is essentially the legal premise undergirding all of this. And what that means is that after you ask them and they say nope, then you have to go through a formal hearing. And you've got to have evidence. And I've been on those, in this case, state PTA grievance committees, and the evidence can be terribly interesting. That much in terms of people's emails and Facebook postings for the last 1.5 years of where they've all trashed each other. It's, it just goes on and on.
Why would you, so something interesting, hypothetically speaking, why would, as long as you are following the guidelines and the rules,
Yep.
and attended at
If you miss 3 in a row,
3 in a row.
you can be
must-
asked to resign.
Right. What if you're, like, it's suggested in person without email? What if you sent email or any kind of communication and you said it's ignored?
Right.
But in person, they'll go and talk to you. What's your feeling on that? Or is that normal?
Is it normal
Is that
for
normal?
what?
No reply at all.
It's normal, and it's really worrying, especially if somebody's a board member, particularly if somebody's a treasurer. I mean, it's like, you know, everybody's red flags go off, and everyone essentially gets very upset. Go ahead.
I mean, I think that situation falls under, regardless of whether they come to the meeting or not, at some point in time, if they're not responding, they're not doing their job.
Exactly.
Right?
No matter
So,
who it is.
No matter who it is, right? So I think that Tom an HR person, right? So, I mean, that's how I look at it, is even if they're coming to all the meetings, I still think there's still some sort of grounds, if you wanna call it that way. If they're not responding to any emails, and then fundamentally, they're not doing their job, right? Because there's something that must be dropping if they're not responding to your emails, right? So I would think that, you know, in that particular instance, you would have, you know, a rationale for asking the person to step down or whatever, or pull
You have to have a reason.
Yeah.
And it's really, really important that you act, it can't be they wear green and you hate green, okay? It can't be that 5 years ago, their kid got the part in the play or got to be the team captain and your kid didn't, and you've never liked them since then. None of that is relevant, obviously, right? So it honestly has to be that this person has done something injurious to the organization. This person has done something which is against PTA policy, bylaws, or procedures. You have to have it documented. You have to have that running list of October 3rd, this is what happened or didn't happen. November 19th, again, nothing. So if you have somebody on your board that is problematic, that's when, if you're president, if you're a board member, you start keeping a record, because you got to have a paper trail. Nothing works with a paper trail. The only other thing I just say about that is that doesn't matter what you say on your private Facebook page about, you know, Mona is a very bad person, whatever words you want to use, which might be horribly insulting to people. That's your private Facebook page. Just don't do it on your PTA Facebook, right? Because honestly, it doesn't matter if some bunch of adults are really being nasty to each other. Go ahead.
But do you have to have two separate identities on Facebook? Can't you just have one and just be clean?
Yeah, you can do whatever you like as an individual. I'm just saying it's just not going to fly. Nothing flies no matter how nasty somebody is about your PTA or about your PTA officers on a private individual's Facebook page. That's their right as an American. So, you know, slander, libel, none of that comes into it. People think, oh, it must be slander, it must be libel. No, it doesn't come into it. It's not, those legal pieces aren't affected in this situation. So what that means is that none of that is evidence of anything.
If I wanted to continue helping, I've made some improvements through phone calls and emails, right, from the city to get the street improved on safety, and that's been happening quickly, which is great, without any issues. But as a PTA safety chair for the school, can I not do that? Am I not supposed to do that?
Well, I mean, I think you're talking about something quite different.
Yeah.
As a safety chair, you're really supposed to do what your PTA board and association directs you to do.
Okay.
So, road safety, road potholes may be a consideration that you personally are really interested in, but if everybody else says we need stoplights, then and they vote for that, that's what you've got to focus on.
Okay.
Yeah.
Speaking of attendance, are the meetings supposed to reflect every board member that's there? Is it supposed
Yes.
to keep the roll call? Yeah?
Yes, you're supposed to have all meetings, board, association, you're supposed to have a attendance list. And the reason is, and this is something that I say again and again, so you probably have heard me say it before, it is simply that in a perfect world, having minutes, having bylaws up to date, Having the attendance of members at meetings, who cares? Nobody cares. Big deal. We're a bunch of parents getting together trying to do good things for our kids' school. But in an imperfect world such as ours, if for any reason you have a problem, somebody steals $500 from your book fair, right? You're gonna go to the insurance people, or if they steal $10,000, you had a huge event, made lots of money, you're going to go to PTA insurance. They ask you for, give us 6 months of your minutes. In other words, you have to prove that you have existed as a nonprofit 501c3, adhering to all the legal pieces. One of those legal pieces is you have to have minutes that have attendance lists. You actually have to have motions for, spending money. You actually have to show that stuff like insurance, you've paid that insurance, all of that. Corporate code, California state corporate code, it says a nonprofit 501c3 has to have 3 officers are required. A president, a secretary, a treasurer. That's what the law says. We can't have co-presidents or co-secretaries or co-treasurers. You can make people aides to the president. You can make them, your high empress of the north if they want to be called that. The other one's the president. You can call them anything you like. Just never in writing on your on your Facebook, your PTA Facebook page, on your website. Never have co-officers, because the insurance company will look at it and say you're not operating properly as a nonprofit. You're not actually legit. And so it's because of those imperfect situations that come up that stuff like attendance lists, because attendance lists show quorum. They prove that you had that 9 people in the room because 9 is your quorum.
Right.
Those are all the little legal pieces that we, as we go along merrily in our way, we don't really pay attention to. And it's because it's okay in a perfect world, but it's when stuff happens that all of these things have to be produced. And that's why we do them, essentially, more than anything else. Go ahead.
So you mentioned quorum, and
Yeah.
the quorum you need that to conduct any business,
Yeah.
right? So what if you have some flaky members,
Sure.
and there's always only 2 or 3 people at a meeting at a time?
Yeah.
Does that
hard.
essentially mean you really don't have a PTA because there's nobody there to do the work?
Yeah, you've got to beat the bushes.
Or can you change the quorum to 2 people?
No.
No.
Your bylaws,
Or 3
I'll tell you,
members?
for a unit, board meeting can't be less than 5. It's based on the number of your board members. Minimum is 5 for a board. For an association or general meeting, minimum is 11 in PTA. And honestly, if you're at a school with 600, 700 kids, and you can't get 11 people in a room, 11 parents or teachers in a room on a Wednesday night, I know that we live busy lives, but you've got to start beating the bushes. You've got to get people to come. Did you have a thought?
Yeah, you mentioned teachers. I'm pretty sure in ours, the teachers don't vote, are they?
Of course they can. Yeah.
You appoint one, right?
For a board meeting,
Yeah.
you would have exactly as she says, you'd have a teacher rep, but you know what? Any teacher, any student, an 8-year-old can be a member, and they can vote at your meetings. When my kids were at school, my husband, my 2 daughters, and me, 4 members from our house.
Or talking general meetings
At general meetings, yes. So what that meant was, that April-May meeting where nobody shows up because there's going to be an election, and they don't want to be that person who suddenly is the 3rd VP of communications. They really don't want to go there. Nobody shows up. What we did was because we had members, our whole families, all board members, everybody in your family was a member, and grandma was a member in case she happened to be in town. You got on the phone and you said, we're standing in the MP room, there's 9 of us here. I need 2 more people so that we can pass motions for money that have to be done tonight. can you get over here? And my husband would get over there, you know, he had 10 minutes from where I lived to school, or somebody else's partner would get over there. So that's how we handle it. It happens to all PTAs, but teachers, of course, are full members.
They're full members, but at least in ours, I think they aren't board members. At board meetings, it's just parents, is that right?
Board meetings, one person who's gonna be on the board is a teacher's rep. In the bylaws, the provision is for,
But they can be.
is for a principal and a teacher's rep.
Who was our secretary one year.
Oh.
But you don't,
So they just fill one of the roles? One of
they can, but I'll tell you, you have to be really careful. You have to check your school district allows it.
Oh.
More and more school districts do not want their teachers involved as board members, except as a teacher's rep, and a parent club, because it gets to be self-dealing and they can get in trouble for it.
And don't we appoint them, right? The executive board appoints that
Well,
teacher.
different PTAs do it in different ways, frankly.
Because we have a problem with our principal controlling our PTA.
Mhm.
Them saying, well, I want a different teacher every day, or
Right.
we have to sign up in the teacher. Well, that's not what our bylaws say.
Right,
Hijacks our meetings.
right. So you have to do your work. Yes, sir.
One teacher.
Oh.
Does voting within the time frame of the minutes, does it count if it's the voting's done by a board member electronically within the time frame of the meeting actually being held?
So in terms of electronic voting, you mean somebody on conference call, something like that?
Yes, conference call.
Unit bylaws do not have that provision. The new 218 bylaws, they have the new provision, there's a new clause in there that lets you, for the very first time actually, legally send notices by email. I know we've been doing it for years, but now there's actually a legal piece in there. Having conference calls for meetings, you can have conference calls for meetings as long as you have no motions involving money. Right? You can talk plans, you can Skype each other, talk plans. You can't pass motions unless you have, in your bylaws, there's a paragraph that you have in state PTA bylaws, district PTA bylaws, and council PTA bylaws that allow teleconferencing for voting. The units at the moment don't have that as an option. The dream is by next year you'll have it as an option in your bylaws. I've allowed maybe a dozen PTAs in California out of 3,600 units. They have that paragraph that lets them legally have teleconferencing, whether it's Skype or whatever platform you want to use. They can do it. And as I say, I think you're going to have it within about six months that everybody can do it. Because it's the way we do business.
So via email is okay when you're,
Email is now legal.
or motions on money?
No,
No.
not on motions,
For
no.
approval of budget.
For a budget,
Yeah.
well, but a budget has to, the problem is that with teleconferencing, in theory, no motion is legit unless you have this paragraph, which is like 4 lines long, in your bylaws. That's the bottom line.
How about proxy voting?
Proxy voting has nothing to do with teleconferencing, right?
Yeah.
And the reason I mention that is sometimes people have that mixed up in their minds. Proxy voting means I can't go to the meeting. I say, can you vote yes on that? I know they want to do that. And so she's going to go into the meeting and say, I have 2 votes, I got Maggie's as well, right? That's proxy voting is giving your vote to somebody else. Or, the way you have sometimes with political meetings, sometimes with trade union meetings, etc. I have 60,000 votes over here, this one guy. That's proxy voting. So that's not allowed.
Does it have to be a written proxy?
You can't have any kind of proxy voting. And it says that, in fact, I think in all caps, in our bylaws in about 2 places, proxy voting is prohibited. Yeah.
In the new bylaw or the old?
In both.
Both.
Yeah. And again, that's a piece that's actually corporate code for nonprofits. It's not like a PTA thing. It's a California state thing. So this is the kind of thing you're gonna find in your bylaws, just real fast. And I suspect you guys are very familiar with this. You're gonna find things about boards and elections when they happen, right? You're gonna have that as a unit. All your official names, your ID numbers. You know, if your name is Phoebe Apperson Hurst Elementary PTA, and you call yourself Hurst PTA, that's fine, but on all your government filings and your taxes, you gotta have that big name, Phoebe Apperson Hurst Elementary PTA, that's your legal name. That's in your bylaws, that kind of thing. All the ID numbers, right? There's an IRS EI number. There's a franchise tax board number, there's a charitable trust number. You need all this stuff to operate as a nonprofit in California with the AG's office, the Attorney General's office. Couple of things before I just look real fast at the new bylaws. A bylaws committee, the kind of things you want to talk about, it's strategic. Bylaws are really a way, a tool, if you like, to work smarter. So when you look at bylaws, you think in terms of, are these bylaws still a good fit? You know, our bylaws are 12 years old. 12 years ago, we had 7 vice presidents. There were tons of people who could be vice president. Nobody wants to be vice president anymore. Everybody's got 2 jobs. So could they just be chairs? Could we get rid of those to make our quorum smaller? Meetings, OMG, nobody comes to our meetings Friday at 5 o'clock at night. I can't understand it. Well, you know what? I don't think that's gonna be a good time. It may have worked at some point, but generally speaking, you should not be complaining about nobody coming to your meetings. You should be working a little smarter and saying, when is a good time? Or if somebody says to you, our meetings are always Wednesday at 7 o'clock. And you know what? The middle school, they always have their PTA meetings. It's always been a problem. Duh, change it. Change it now so it's not a problem anymore. That's the sort of the red light to make you sit up and say, we should change this. Membership dues, that's gonna be in your bylaws. Are they a good price point for your community, right? Does everybody say, ooh, $5, that works? I've had bylaws lately coming in from all over the state. Some clever clogs at some point said, oh, let's do $12 and make a couple of bucks out of this. They're bringing them down from $12 to $10 in terms of sort of upgrading their bylaws and updating them. And essentially it's because, you know what? It's easier for me to perhaps have 2 5s on me, or I would rather write a check for $10 rather than $12. 12 is awkward, right? So you get people, when they look at groups, units, look at their bylaws, they don't just make their dues go up, they also sometimes make them go down. Because they think, you know what, this is crazy. Why are we saying $10? That's way too much. Let's do $5 and we'll get more members. Whatever it is your rationale might be as a community.
So do members have to pay dues? You said all teachers are members, but then members have to pay dues?
Teachers can be members. Everybody has to pay dues because...
So you're not a member unless you pay dues?
That's right.
So
because we're a private oddly enough, we're a private membership organization. We're not actually, everybody gets to be a member. They have to pay membership. That's our sort of the legal piece.
So how do you manage meetings where a bunch of parents just show up, you don't know if they're members or not?
Right. So you say to people, are you a member? And some organizations, or some PTAs I should say, they have people show their membership card when they sign in, because that famous attendance list, when you come in, you're going to have to pass that clipboard around or get people to sign in at the front. I've been in meetings where if you were a member, it meant you got to vote on something important like disbanding a PTA because they wanted to be a PTO, right? There was one in Fremont many years ago. The place was packed with like 300, 400 people, high school. 6 people essentially on the board had pushed this notion of they didn't want to be a PTA anymore. It got down to you had to have your card and you had to do your vote, and it honestly came down to like 1 or 2 votes out of the several hundred, and they voted to stay to be a PTA. but you had to have people prove they were a member by showing their membership card. And you can do that electronically. You can have a membership card nowadays on your phone. You don't actually have to have a bit of paper. Standing rules, we talked a little bit about, how you might be able to change that a little bit. Last couple of pieces. As I mentioned in passing, we have new bylaws coming in, 2018 remodel bylaws. And, this is just two pictures of the cell phone. The gentleman on the right, that's a man using a cell phone, one of the first, 1973, right? On the other side, you have a woman, modern day cell phone, 2018. And I don't think many people would disagree, change is good. When you look at that kind of change. Remodel bylaws give you just a little taste in terms of the kind of things. They were designed essentially to be more user-friendly. They were slimmed down. They're half the size. They're approximately 18 pages rather than 34 pages, for instance, for your average unit bylaws. You have with the changes as well, essentially the notion was, how should we make these so that units have more authority? How can we make it so that they're more autonomous, right? So in changing them, we worked for about a year on this. In changing the unit council and district bylaws were all changed for state PTA. They have all been printed. If you were looking for a paper copy, they have all been put into what's a PDF fillable version that council and district leaders get. And the last piece is the e-bylaws, the online service that you do your bylaws. It'll be ready in a few weeks. We heard this week, which is slow. They've had them for weeks and weeks, but they're not done yet. So in any case, how they're different, text is different. If you look at the old bylaws, and I'm just looking around to see if I happen to have them with me close by. The old bylaws had page that says, procedures for bylaws review. There's 2 pages for instructions in using the bylaws. Those are taken out, and instead they're actually on the website instead, rather than having to use them in the bylaws. They were in the bylaws because, as you can appreciate, 20 years ago there was only a paper version. Now everybody does them online when they do the unit bylaws. So those kind of things were taken out. Things like duties, right? You had all the job descriptions. Those have been taken out of the new bylaws. Oh, here they are. To reduce them. And instead, you want to know what your duty is as the president, look at the job description and the toolkit. Because as you can appreciate, changing a job description when they're in bylaws takes a lot of time. Whereas I can change as a parliamentarian for state PTA, I can change the job description tomorrow. If I send it in and say, stick this on the website in the toolkit kind of thing. So you've got that, consolidation. The old bylaws you used to have to put, when your audits were, right? You used to have to put these various sort of instructional information pieces. That's all been taken out because those things aren't actually supposed to be in bylaws. They're things that go in standing rules. So when you look at the new bylaws, as I say, you're going to find that one happens to be half the size of the other with the new one. Generally speaking, where a lot of stuff has gotten pushed is in the standing rules. So there used to be, as part of the PTA bylaws, because sometimes people don't quite get this, PTA bylaws have standing rules. People often say to me, oh, can you give me an example of standing rules? That's part of your bylaws, is the standing rules. So there used to be 11 standing rules, and now there's like 18. And what it means is that stuff that used to be in bylaws, directory data, stuff listed here, VP titles, first VP membership, second VP programs chair, that kind of thing. Those aren't in the body of the bylaws anymore. they've been pushed to the standing rules. Big deal. So why would that be of any value to anybody? Who cares if they're on page 18, which is a standing rule now, rather than page 5?
They're easier to change.
Real easy. You don't have to send them through channels, right, to get them changed. You just have to vote at an association meeting. So now these kind of things, unbudgeted expenditures, all that stuff's in your standing rules, and you can deal with it as a unit leader much more quickly and efficiently. Things like committee information, that's been pushed as well into standing rules. So that's just to give you a sense of, you know, what the difference is. Last piece, has anybody used e-bylaws? Have you ever used them?
No, but I want to ASAP.
Okay.
I wanna change mine, so can that be, do I have to wait for a certain date or?
Right, well, you simply have to ask for a password. Has anybody had a chance to use it? Have you
Yeah,
used it?
I've gotten online and I've been told I have to wait till the new template comes out, so I can't change it now.
They said next month maybe.
You can, it is actually, they told us very recently, it's gonna take another month. So, that's the 218 bylaws. 217, you can still use e-bylaws to do the 217 bylaws. So you're still able to do that. How you do it is you go to the state PTA website, right? And then you have the drop-down menu from leaders, you see services, and then the other menu drops down. You choose e-bylaws, click on there. You're gonna go to the state PTA website e-bylaws page, right? And this is where you're gonna ask for your username and password. Click on that button, request username and password, and you fill out a little form, right? Name, email, all that sort of stuff, position, your unit, that kind of thing. Somebody in the PTA office looks at these because weirdly enough, we occasionally get people who ask to have access to e-bylaws who actually the unit doesn't know who they are. So, units don't like it. Somebody wants to change their bylaws who's not authorized to do that. So the person in the state office in Sacramento, they will actually do a little check. Is this the president of record? Is this the parliamentarian of record? If it's somebody who's not on our records as on that board, they'll contact the PTA president and say, do you know, is so-and-so, is it okay to let them use the bylaws? And usually it's, oh yeah, of course. That's our new parliamentarian. But sometimes you get this weird
Can more than
thing.
one position or board member have
Yes.
request that?
Yes. You can have usually 2 or 3, and they're able to go in. As you suggested, when you fill out the form and you submit it, it's not like Amazon. You're not going to get with an algorithm throw back your password and your username right away. You're actually going to have to wait a couple of days.
3 days.
There you go.
You have to wait 3 days.
So, you know, when you're all excited in your jammies at 2 in the morning of let's do it, let's get these bylaws done, you can't do it. You're gonna have to be patient and wait till you get your username back. They're gonna send it to you in an email, right? And once you get that, you come back to this page and then you hit access e-bylaws and you put in the password and the username. And it's gonna let you in, and it's gonna be your bylaws. And the thing about it too, you'll see on the state PTA website, there's a couple of tools. There's a worksheet, review, instructions for completing bylaws, that kind of thing you can get. This is the very first page of e-bylaws you're gonna see. You can't change anything on it. All you can do is just look through it, make sure everything's right, and you say, oh, it looks okay, but you know what? We're not 9th to 12th grade anymore. We're 8th to 12th grade. We just changed. So to get that change in e-bylaws, tell your council, your district people, right? And they're gonna send a form to state PTA that asks us to change e-bylaws, and we'll change them. So that, because these are all the legal pieces for you as a nonprofit. And this is information that rarely gets changed. So this is the very first screen. Just gonna say who you are, your name, your legal name, when you were organized, all that stuff. And this is just like an example of what the screen looks like. There are 8 screens. This is not big. And hopefully when they've done the 2018 bylaws, there should be 6 screens that you're going to use. So all it does is ask you these yes or no questions, and by saying yes, we have a corresponding secretary, or yes, we have an auditor, the language from the template is going to get filled in accordingly. It's going to have everything in it that you need if you said yes, we have a financial secretary. So that's going to go in the right places, right? It's just going to generate this general template based on what you choose. Go ahead.
So when you don't have a particular office, like an auditor,
Yeah.
who takes on that role? Is that just the president, or?
No. President should never be an auditor because they sign checks,
Right.
right?
Okay. Well then,
So don't ever go there, like don't get stuck in that situation. So generally speaking, you have to, as a nonprofit, you have to have 2 audits a year. And that's in your bylaws. So if you don't have anybody to do the auditing, your council can give you can get somebody to do an audit for you. You can talk to people on the council or the district PTA. Sometimes what people do is their treasurers from different close by PTA schools, each of them, the treasurers will audit the other one, that kind of stuff. And big PTAs, they hire accountants to do it. CPAs come in and do their audits because they use them for their taxes.
So is the corresponding secretary the one who does the minutes and the financial secretary is something different?
So that's a good question. So just start first, financial secretary. Financial secretary helps the treasurer. Their primary job is to deposit any sort of cash or checks in the bank account and then give the receipts to the treasurer for the records, right? So if you're a PTA that the treasurer, it's a big job, all of these PTA jobs are big jobs. This is actually a really good way to job share, as to have a financial secretary. A corresponding secretary, somebody who's a secretary, they have this fancy title of recording secretary, right? You can have, your PTA secretary can be a recording secretary, or they can be a secretary. If you happen to have a corresponding secretary, that's the person who does all the notices. They're supposed to be the person who lets people know there's a meeting coming up, here's the agenda for the meeting, that kind of thing. So they might also do any sort of emails you get, any notes, any thank you notes from teachers or from kids, whatever the deal is, they might deal with that. So again, it's like job sharing. And the value of these littler positions isn't just the job sharing, it's because these are entry positions, right? Historian, corresponding secretary, financial secretary. These are people who can be your VP next year, or they might be the treasurer next year if they were the financial secretary to start off. So in that way, they're very good entry positions for the future. Last couple of things, e-bylaws. E-bylaws always assumes that you have these 5 positions. And it's going to spew out the language all the way through the bylaws for these 5 positions, right? 3 are required by law. Big 3, secretary, treasurer, president, right? The other 2 are just assumed in e-bylaws. If you think, why the heck would we have a historian? What is God's name would be the purpose of that? That's okay, you don't have to have one. All you have to do, though, is you actually have to print out your bylaws from the e-bylaws online program when you're done. You download the PDF, you print a hard copy, and then you sit there and you line through the stuff you didn't want, like the historian position. You can't make the change in e-bylaws. So you have to do it physically with a pen and a ruler kind of deal. Go ahead.
And if you have more, we have a whole bunch more than that, all kinds
Sure.
of things, this chair and that chair.
Yeah.
You can add more on e-bylaws too, or?
Sure, yep. Yeah, you can add the standing committees, they're added at one point, you list those. The VPs, you list those, what their titles are, right? You put that in e-bylaws.
And they would all be voting too, right?
Yeah. They'd be part of your board, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So for your executive board, just to give you an idea, when you use e-bylaws, anytime there's an error, like it's idiot-proof, it's great. It's real easy for people like me to use. So If I see something that has a red line around the box, it means there's an error. You need to fix that before it's gonna be bylaws complete, right? So if you hover over the red box with your cursor in e-bylaws, it's always gonna have a little pop-up info piece. In this case, it's saying to me, you gotta change that first Tuesday for the meetings because the executive board has to be 14 days before the association meeting. Why? Who the heck thought up this crazy formula? The state of California, the Attorney General, because it's in corporate code as a nonprofit. That's why there has to be 14 days. It's to give nonprofit members proper notice of what's happening at a meeting. Believe it or not, that's the weird part. Did you have a thought, ma'am?
Just one question, I don't know if it's you. When you're doing the budget and you need to vote on it,
Yeah.
who's coming up with the budget? Is that a group thing? Is it just the executive board? Is it just the treasurer and the president, or?
So if there's a budget, the budget gets put together usually by the treasurer and hopefully a couple of other people can be part of that committee. They're gonna then present, they're gonna go away as a little committee, those 2 or 3 people or whoever. They're gonna come back to the board. The board actually has to vote to approve the budget, right? And then it goes to the general membership, another meeting. How many meetings do you need? So general membership is people more than the board. Board plus ordinary members. And they have to vote on it, and they have to approve it. Hopefully near the beginning of the year so you can do stuff. So it has to go through this whole little process. And that actually, it tells you that in the bylaws. That's the kind of thing it says in the bylaws and in the toolkit. Last couple of things, just, sort of quick FYI when you're using e-bylaws. As I said, I underline the idea that weirdly you cannot upload. Going online to do e-bylaws, and yet you can't just upload what you've just completed. Instead, you literally have to print out a hard copy. You have to make 3 of these, at least. One, you probably want to make 4. 1 to keep, 1 to give to council, 1 goes to district, 1, I get 1, state PTA, right? So you make the 3 copies at least, plus 1 for yourselves. You're gonna make it double-sided. We're gonna save a few trees in the process. You're also going to, in terms of text changes, as I mentioned, you have to handwrite them in pen. And there's also what's called a bylaw submittal form. What's PTA without yet another form, right? And you can find that in the toolkit online at the capta.org website. Do you have any sort of questions for me? Is that a little fast run through all this stuff? Go ahead.
I have a quick question. Okay, so the allowing of like video and teleconferencing, is that
Yeah.
something we can write in the standing rules of the unit?
Actually, I have been saying to people you can.
Uh-huh.
If you want to take one of these and pass them on. Sorry, if you came in later, there's little evaluations if you want to do those as well. This other thing is just a handout with some info of the stuff we were looking at today, right? So this question about can you write in this paragraph? Yes, you can. As I said, I've done it for about a dozen PTAs in California. I think that people have to realize how much smarter you're gonna work if you have the ability to have conference calls as a board. It means that when you're stuck in traffic trying to get home, you can be on a call for a meeting, right? 5 of you can be on their cell phones, and can be sitting in their cars in 5 different cities, obviously, thank you, and get the meeting done. So you can ask your council or your district, they know about it, there's a paragraph in both the council and in the district bylaws, the actual wording. The reason you have to use this very precise wording is because our state PTA attorney, it complies, she's written it out, it complies with the law for nonprofits, right? You just have to stick that into your bylaws, and when they get approved, you have to send them in to be approved, and I actually will approve them. And because as I say, right now, I think it's good to have units trying this on sort of a pilot basis to see if it works. I don't see why it wouldn't, but you know, we haven't hit any bumps, there haven't been any problems with this. So that if you're interested, you can email me and I can send you the actual wording. Okay? Go ahead.
You have said something at the end that you have to submit your form, where?
You send it to your council, are you in a council?
No.
Okay, so you send it straight to the district. Send it to the district
Ujwala.
president, yes, you just send it to Ujwala. And she will, she goes through the stuff, as, cause she's acting as parliamentarian, and then she sends it to the state PTA office, and then once a week I get a big box that comes to my house, in Pleasanton.
Not on the online, there's no submission form online.
No, isn't that weird? The form, the submittal form, it's online that you have to download and print.
Okay.
Because we have to have hard copies at the moment.
But before you, I mean, you print it out, but then you have to take it to your board first
Yes.
before you send it to you, right?
Yes, of course.
Yeah.
And if you look at the little handout, you'll see, it talks there about the parliamentary, the bylaws review process. Did I give you that one? Yeah. Easy steps to PTA bylaws reviews on page 3, I think, of the handout I gave you. And in there it tells you, you take it to the board. The board says, well, that looks good. They approve it. Then it gets sent to your council or district PTA parliamentarian who sends it to state. I approve them, I sign off on them, then I send them back to your district parliamentarian, or in this case, Ujwala, your DP, she gets them, and then she'll get them back to you. So it's a process. After you've had your bylaws approved by state PTA, when you have your next association meeting, the big meeting, general meeting, you get your members to vote, right? And when they vote, if they say, yes, we approve these, you give them 30 days notice, right? And it's in the bylaws, it tells you all these little specific pieces. That's when you take that signature page, and the president and the secretary, they sign their names, and they put the date of when the association, your general members, when they adopted these bylaws, when they approved them, right? Any more questions or thoughts?
Question.
Real fast.
On the standing rules, the first set are given to us basically by the
Yes.
state, right? Would we ever need to change them, or can we change them?
You can change them if you
Okay.
wish, you know,
Okay.
take a look at them, you might look at something and say that doesn't really work for us. If it's a
Okay.
legal piece, it'll have the little stars with it.
Okay.
Okay? Anything else? Thank you very much, you've been very patient.
Great, thanks, Maggie.